Hello everyone, just wanted to do a quick introduction to this video. This will probably be the same introduction I'll put to every video that I splice up. I've been doing this program, I guess you could say, on Facebook Live with a pastor of a evangelical church in Ontario, California. His name is Dr. Fidel Arnacillo. The church was founded a few years ago. It was a church plant of the Evangelical Covenant Church, which is a denomination of in the tradition of Lutheran Pietism, is what I understand it to be, and I have a very vague understanding of what that is. I did some Google searching. Nevertheless, so what my role in that program, and it is hosted by their church Facebook page, is to provide a Catholic commentary, but also as a representative, I guess, of what you could consider classical Christianity or classical views of Christianity. I have some understanding of conservative Protestant views, so I'll probably throw that in there as well, and I'll probably throw in, if there is a spectrum of Catholic perspectives from more liberal to conservative to traditional views, I'll probably throw that in there as well. The series has to do with ORT, or open and relational theology, and what that basically means is that the future is open. God does not know the future. He can see, or he has knowledge of all the possible variations of possibilities, but he himself does not know the future and know how the outcomes will turn out. And so that already is a departure from classical Christian theology, certainly Catholic theology, which posits as a dogma, or proposes as a dogma, not proposes. It has declared as a dogma predestination. So the future is set. We are what we experience is sort of the playing out of that, the eternal decrees of God in time. So I won't get into that, but anyway, ORT doesn't believe in that stuff. It believes that God is sort of experiencing the events of in time in the same way we are. So he's sort of at the edge of his seat, he's reacting to things as they play out. Okay, so that's the open piece of it. And relational has to do with, God having, it's more than God having anthropomorphisms in the language of the Bible. He actually experiences, his experience is very much similar to our own experience, and so we look at our own human experience, and we come to the conclusion, or we assume then, that God has similar attributes in the same way we do. So if we love, we have the capacity of love. God loves in some similar fashion and not some other different kind of way. So, or whether it's quantitative or qualitative, we shouldn't assume any kind of metaphysical conclusions apart from what we experience in the natural world, and also what we know from sort of natural theology, I suppose, right? We wouldn't get into systematic theology, or delve deep into metaphysical claims that are foreign to, or far removed from, I suppose, biblical language, or human experience. So I guess I will leave it at that. And every sort of topic, I'm trying to break down each session into the different topics within each section. So I'm numbering them based on the chapters from this book, Open and Relational Theology. And I should, I know it's backwards, but it's by Thomas J. Ord, who is a famous, I guess, a proponent of ORT. He was also removed from his position in an evangelical seminary because of his views, obviously, on supporting ORT, which departs from traditional evangelical, I suppose, views of theology. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you find these topics interesting. Bye.
And then the next thing that he actually covered is that God being an artist. Usually, when we think of God, right, being an artist or being a poet, right, seems to be the last thing in people's mind. But in open and relational theology, that is actually central. Seeing God as an artist, seeing God as a poet, rather than seeing God as an architect or seeing God as um, what do they um, seeing God as being all powerful, right? Being omniscient, right? Open and relational theologians like to emphasize that God is an artist or God is a poet. I don't know if you wanted to say something about that before we look at what Ord said in the book.
Yeah, I don't see. Again, I think you would be preaching to the choir here. I mean, if you look at as far as the spectrum of Christianity, if you walk into an Eastern Orthodox church or a Roman Catholic church, especially in Europe, which I've never been to, but I've seen pictures. Right? There definitely is an emphasis on beauty, the arts,
Yeah.
literature throughout the centuries. Like, not that I've read these because I'm not much of a reader in terms of the poems and things like that, but Dante's Inferno or the Paradise Lost, all those kinds of things. I mean, they're all products of Christian culture, specifically Catholic Christian culture. So Catholics are not opposed to beauty in architecture and the inspiration of God. I mean, we had this discussion offline, not on the program, but I remember speaking with someone who was making this commentary where if you look, if I think it's in St. Peter's Basilica, which is really tall and very humongous, right? But if the statuary, you have to climb lots of stairs to get up to the top. You won't be able to see the detail of the statuary up in the rafters or wherever it is. But the detail, I was told, is just as meticulously created up top, where nobody in the congregation will ever see, hardly ever will ever see those details as the statuary and the arts that are at eye level. And the point that was made by the commentator was to say, that kind of emphasis has been lost, where art these days is sort of functional, or it's superficial. It's what you can see. So when you see even furniture, the ornamentation is only on the front or whatever people see. But then you look at the back, you find out it's particle board. It's not. I don't know if the point I'm making is clear. That beauty and art was made for God. The emphasis back then was that it's sort of a manifestation of one of the attributes of God, right? Beauty, truth, goodness, that kind of a thing. And maybe that's limited to Thomism, but I know that enumeration is consistent throughout Catholic philosophy. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
What I'm saying?
yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I think the point of Ord here in this chapter is probably much more substantive than that, right? Using the imagery of an artist, a poet, to actually describe who God is, right? It has something to do with God, right? That this is really at the core, that what God has been doing, right, in relation to creation, is like God is like creating a work of art, right? Or God is actually writing a poem. That God is a poetic genius, right? Or God is the poet of the world, right?
I
So
see what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah, so it's probably much more substantive. Um, so he even, or at least he pointed out that for some open and relational theologians, how the Holy Spirit, right, inspires humans to do something while they're co-creating with God. This is like like the muse, right, in ancient Greece, right, in ancient Greek literature, right, the muse that actually inspires the artist, the muse that inspires the poet to actually to be a mouthpiece for God or something like that, right?
Sure.
So even how the Holy Spirit works, right, seems to be compared to, how the muse, right, in ancient Greek literature, right, functions in relation to writers, in relation to artists, right? So in some sense, God is the one who provides the vitality, the energy, right, to actually create something, right? But not just create something, but create something with deep creativity, right? Create something that is meaningful. So I don't know if that makes sense, right? So it has
Well, is
something
he
to do with the reality of God. Go ahead.
is he a good artist?
Who?
God.
Yeah. So that would be the assumption here, right? And one of and this is probably common in like mainline or liberal Protestant theology, to actually see creativity as one of an attribute of God, right? Or probably one of the core attributes of God, that God is creative,
Yeah.
right? Because again,
Well,
go ahead, go ahead.
yeah. I guess um, you know, it, with along the same lines, and I don't know if classical Catholic philosophy would equate, the omnis, the
Mhm,
omniscience, the omnipresence, omnipotence with the some other attributes, and maybe there's another term for it. So maybe it's not attributes, but
mhm.
beauty, truth, goodness, all that stuff. So the highest, if there's such a thing as gradations of beauty, right? Then God has to be the pinnacle, or like the exemplar of of artists, right? So if he is the inspiration for great art, he must be the best artist in the universe, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the rationale? Like, why does God have to be the best artist? Or maybe it's not. Maybe ORT doesn't say he's the best artist, but is that the assumption, that he's
Yeah.
an amazing whatever he creates, whatever poetry he you know writes, is it necessarily good? Is it
Yeah.
good because he's good, or is it
No,
that kind of thing?
I think the idea here is that since the future is open,
Mm,
so whatever it is that happens, God creatively, right, does something, right, to this new events that arise, right? Um, so as new events are uh, materialized, due to partly due to free agencies of humans, God somehow creatively probably put them in some kind of order, right? Probably God does something in order to make it meaningful. Um, so somehow, right? He finds ways to make sense of things, right? Make sense of things in probably in very edifying ways. In the same way, how we react to poetry. There's something seemingly edifying about it.
mhm,
Okay, so probably that's the nature of God's creativity.
mm. Well, do you reckon? I mean, do you think that all art is good art, like in your opinion, or is there really a standard by which we can critique different kinds of art? Like some art is bad. Like the example I usually give in my class is do 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 what was his name? Duchamp? I forget his name, but he was one of these anti artists, right? So he basically put it on display a urinal
Hmm.
in the 1940s, I think it was,
Hmm.
and that was his art piece. And there was another artist, that basically took a dump in a can and he labeled it artist shit.
Yeah.
And that was the art.
Mm-hmm.
Or, there was a pile of bricks somewhere. It's just a pile of bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the art. Like, is that art? Is that beautiful? Or is that even a relevant thing in... Am I going on a tangent here? Because
No. I do believe that there are objective standards of beauty, right? Because there are, art critics debate about things, right? And they have something to debate about. And there are works of art that do not turn into, a classic work of art. But there are works of art that actually become classic because they continually captivate, right, the imagination of humans, right? There's probably something there, right? It's not the case that all works of art survive the test of time. There are works of art that survive the test of time, and they seem to have probably some basic similar features. One of them might be that there's something interesting about them. The urinal, there's something about it that is interesting. That's why you cannot redo the same thing, right? You cannot take another urinal, right, and somehow have the same impact, because it looks like you're just copying what it is that he drew, right? There's something probably interesting about John Pollock's, throwing the paint, right, on a canvas, right, and allowing design to somehow emerge in the process, right, even though it's like random movements, right. But again, no one. I think if anybody else will do something similar, it might not have the same impact,
right.
right? It has an interesting impact when John Pollock was doing it. Why? Because he was the first one to do it, probably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Like a former professor at Cal State, and he was there when you were there. He was my psychology professor on intelligence and creativity in psychology. And I remember these conversations we would have in class, where what is creativity? How do we define creativity? Is there something objective about it? Or is it merely a departure from the norm? Because if it's kind of like, it sounded like what Kenny you were describing, is there something interesting about it? And once you do it, then if somebody else is copying it, it's not a creativity anymore. It's not art or something like that, right? But you could have schools of art, right? And I'm not an art critic or anything like that, schooled in the arts, but you probably have different artists that are famous that are in the same school, right? And they're all producing similar styles, right? But I don't think anybody would claim that, okay, well, that person already did it, therefore the next person in line that was taught by the other guy is no longer producing something of value, or is no longer producing something that's art or valuable or interesting, because there's a different purpose to it, right? When you go into the Sistine Chapel, the purpose of that art is not a manifestation of the artist's creativity. He's not trying to convey his personality, like I would assume a Pollock painting is that. It's an expression of that individual's personality, as opposed to the kind of art you would I'm talking about in the Sistine Chapel. You're trying to convey some kind of eternal truth or a story or some kind of reality, right? And I think that's part of a lot of the debate, I guess, in the arts is what is the purpose of art? Is it self-expression, departure from the norm, or is it trying to convey eternal truths in this medium somehow?
But irrespective of the purpose, right? It seems that the determination of its beauty, right? Whether it captures what is beautiful, right? is independent of the purpose.
Mm.
It just has something
Yeah.
to do with, probably the complexity, right, of the different strokes of using a brush, right,
Mm.
that might have made it look different, right? Probably there's somebody who improved, how to capture, I don't know, a human eye, right?
Mm.
With realistically in some sense in a portrait, right? So those are improvements, right? So probably, of course, there are probably gradations of beauty, right? I'm not denying that, but still, I think there's something objective about what is beautiful. For example, even when you look at music, same thing, right? Why is it the case that Michael Jackson songs, for example, seem to stand the test of time?
Mm.
Unlike, I don't know, Rick Ashley's songs, right? I used to listen to Rick Ashley when I was in high school, right?
Yeah.
But now, it's like, I know they still play his songs on Fortnite, right? But still, it's like, it sounds corny, right? When there's something
Yeah.
cheesy about it, right?
Yeah. That's true.
You listen to Michael Jackson's music today. I don't know. You might not like it, but it doesn't sound cheesy, right? For whatever
Right.
reason, it maintains its appeal, and not just appealing to me. It's not just appealing to us. It's like appealing everywhere for whatever reason,
Sure.
right? So there's
Yeah.
probably something about beauty
There's
in that
a
sense.
I don't know what brought this conversation up in one of my classes. It was a child development class
Hmm.
over at Chafee, and we were talking about beauty.
Hmm.
And I said, well, what is it that makes something beautiful? Like, we're just talking about music too. And I just kind of spontaneously just pulled up some YouTube videos. I said, let's listen to this music. I pulled up like Britney Spears.
Hmm.
We listened to 30 seconds of Britney Spears. And then we listened to 30 seconds of, I don't know, some hip hop, whatever, rap, whatever. I just thought of something rap, popular music. And then, and I said, well, raise your hand if you think it's beautiful. You would say that what you just heard was beautiful. And 50-50 for all the popular music, the modern music, whatever. And then I put on like Gregorian chant. And, I don't forget what I chose, but it was just random Gregorian chant. I said, raise your hand if you would say, you might not like it. You might not listen to it all the time, but would you say it's beautiful? And every hand was raised.
Hmm.
I also put on Muslim chant, and I don't even know the different styles of Muslim chant, but I put it on.
Hmm.
And it was like 3/4. Like there was some sense of universality there. But, the type of sounds that are produced, it's a different culture. So I can understand why it just doesn't hit their ear, in a palatable way, I guess.
Hmm.
But something about Gregorian chant, like, some of them didn't even never heard it before. And they were attracted to it. So there's something there. I just don't know.
And again, some
What it is.
songs have complexities, right?
Yeah.
Deeper complexities. And I think that's probably also part of what it means for something to be beautiful. And again, you don't have to necessarily like something that is beautiful. Like, I don't like classical music, but I know it's beautiful, right? Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like, I can recognize someone, like say a woman, as beautiful without necessarily liking that person,
Mm.
right? There are people who are probably good-looking people, but I just, I don't necessarily like them.
Yeah. Right.
I'm assuming, like, for example, when is Jennifer Gardner beautiful? Yeah, she's beautiful, but I don't seem to like her. Like, I don't think that. You know what I mean? But again, so probably the likability might be culturally conditioned too, right?
Right.
So I'm not conditioned to like classical music,
Right.
but I know that I recognize that it is beautiful,
Sure.
right? Because there's something complex about it,
Right.
right? There's something seemingly intellectual about how it tries to touch human emotions, right? In a very mature way,
Hmm.
right? That's probably what classical music does, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
they've done baby studies. I don't know if you heard of this, but they've
mhm.
done baby studies on pictures
Yeah.
of people,
Hmm.
and they found, or their conclusion was, babies look at beautiful faces longer
Yeah.
and smile more
Hmm.
on faces that adults by and large would consider attractive.
Yeah.
And some of those attributes are like things like symmetry and,
Hmm.
lack of blemishes. I mean, who knows what, but whatever the conclusion was. Anyway, the point was, so babies are not socialized as much as adults are, and
Yeah.
so they probably are more
I think I watched that on TV. Like I think they
obtrusive. Yeah.
showed Halle Berry's picture,
Hmm.
right? Because he has a symmetrical face. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so at least one of the things we can say about God, at least from the standpoint of ORT, is that God is an artist or a poet. Now, but we're talking about beauty. Um, I think there might be some kind of really an objective standard of beauty, right? And we are probably in pursuit of that, right? So part of the task of poets is to probably discover how to beautifully say, beautifully express certain thoughts. And then, so for example, probably, even when you look at it with dance moves, I think it's the same thing, right? With dance moves. I think what dancers try to do is to capture the beautiful, right? But again, beautiful dance moves also have a certain level of degree of complexity, right? The more complex the, at least what we find beautiful moves, right, can be very complex, even in a very subtle way. I think that's what probably ballet dancers do, right? So it might look
Yeah.
easy when you're watching it, but when you actually try to do it, you probably can't do it, right? Now, so I think um, God probably tries to make something beautiful within the limited conditions, right? That is imposed by the situation. But probably he tries to figure out what is the most beautiful way of resolving issues, the most beautiful way, right, of directing, right, the course of history. But there will be some certain limits, right? So probably, the achievement of ultimate beauty, um, that's probably what we will count as, what will happen at the very end, right? Where God, at some point, right, will reach absolute beauty, right? Absolute goodness, absolute truth, right? I know I sound Hegelian here, right? But that's probably what's happening here, and I think it's not it's not wrong to probably incorporate that kind of Hegelian way of thinking, given that Hegel has some kind of influence in process theism, and process theism has an influence in open and relational theology in some sense, right? So now